orders. By U.S., or by default, that's the U.S., okay? In 1991, there was an agreement that reunified Germany after they tore down this wall. During negotiations on February 9th, 1990, U.S. Secretary of State James Baker told Soviet leader Gorbachev that NATO's jurisdiction of forces would not move, quote, 1 inch eastward from their current position if the Soviets accepted German unification in NATO. Now, fast forward to 1994, when Clinton signed off on expanding NATO. And in 1999, Hungary, Poland, and the Czech Republic officially joined NATO. Russia wasn't happy and had their objections, but they actually had no leverage to negotiate because they had just collapsed as the Soviet Union. Fast forward to 2004, where Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia, two of which share a border with Russia, also adding Romania, Bulgaria, Slovakia, and Slovenia to NATO. And Russia, again, was super ticked off about this. And they said, hold up, this is not what we agreed to. NATO didn't care. Then, in April of 2008, at the NATO summit, a bunch of leaders issued a declaration that signaled a, quote, strong support of Ukraine and Georgia to eventually join NATO. Two more countries that border Russia, as you can see. In the Bucharest Summit Declaration of 2008, paragraph 23 states, quote, NATO welcomes Ukraine's and Georgia's Euro-Atlantic aspirations for membership into NATO. We agree today that these countries will become members of NATO. Okay, so Putin's even more angry and went to war in Georgia to stop the NATO membership. People forget this stuff. Then in 2010, we put missile systems, NATO, in Poland and Romania. And the Ukraine president, Yanukovych, was expressly elected on neutrality in Ukraine, which Putin was cool with. But Russia and Ukraine were simultaneously negotiating a 25-year lease in Crimea for a Russian naval base. But then in 2014, while the U.S. tried to overthrow the Ukrainian leaders, which would have potentially put the Russian base there in jeopardy, those negotiations led to Russia taking control of Crimea because they were like, we're not going to deal with this anymore. Keep in mind, Russia had also invested heavily in natural gas in the region, and Ukraine was pumping most of it over to the EU now rather than Russia. Then you had the Minsk agreements that NATO gave autonomy to Russian-speaking bordering areas like the Donbass, the eastern side of Ukraine. And then the U.S. and Ukraine just decided not to enforce that. Then in January of 2022, Anthony Blinken, Biden's Secretary of State, tells Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov that the U.S. reserves the right to put missile systems in Ukraine. 1 month later, Russia invaded Ukraine. Raise your hand if you saw that coming. This is the part of history they don't want you to know. Also, in the first 7 days of the invasion, there were negotiations between Russia and Ukraine. Russia demanded demilitarization. And what happened? Zelensky walked away from those peace talks because he wanted NATO membership. But no one had this conversation, and no one wants to talk about it, and everybody who brings it up gets shouted down. So let me ask those people shouting at me right now, what should the U.S. do if Russia or China put a military base in, say, Cuba? Again, I'm not defending Russia. Wait, hold on a sec here. Russia did put a base in Cuba during the Cold War, and guess what we did? We responded with military action. Remember the Bay of Pigs? How would you feel if China put a military base on the Canadian side of Niagara Falls or in Tijuana, Mexico? Again, not excusing what Russia's actions here, but these are important historical sentiments that we should understand because that's how Putin is thinking if we really want to get to the bottom.